Determining the direction the wind is coming from isn't always a simple process, especially if it's at variable speeds and changing directions constantly. Sailors that are serious about their undertaking need a little information more than just what a wet thumb provides. Of course, a flag or vane will show the direction the wind is blowing. A short piece of yarn attached to something on the boat will do the same thing. The waves and ripples on the surface of the water is yet another indicator. But all things considered, the best way to keep track of the wind direction is by feeling it. Turn your head back and forth until you think you're facing directly into the wind. With a little practice, this will tell you what you need to know quickly and easily. If you have your boat on a straight heading into the wind and the sails begin to luff, the wind has most likely changed directions and has shifted forward. This is called a header. If the wind shifts in the opposite direction or aft, it's called a lift. To correct either one, you have to change your heading to get the sails trimmed. The key is to quickly assess what's happening and make the correction promptly in the right direction.
There's really no excuse nowadays to go sailing without having a good weather report first. It's available on your weather channel at home, on a VHF radio, and through a variety of other sources. Sailing can depend on quality weather, and you really need to understand what you're going to confront when you're out there on that particular day. What we're going to do is to give you some additional tips in this segment that are weather related and will hopefully give you a more enjoyable day on the water.
You should get the weather forecast before you leave the dock, not after you've departed the dock or when you're offshore. You can get up-to-date, accurate weather forecasts on the internet before you leave home or from your portable computer. VHF Radio Marine Weather Forecast is handy and convenient while you're sailing and should be used, but you can get a much better understanding of existing and forecasted weather conditions from a full analysis available on the internet. Knowing when you should go home or stay at the dock is essential to both your pleasure and safety, but marginal, rapidly changing weather conditions can sometimes make that a pretty tough decision to make. There's a simple solution that always works best in all cases. If you're in doubt as to whether or not you should sail, don't. Leave the boat at the dock.
In this particular segment of 60 Tips, we're going to be speaking about tides and currents. Tides and currents affect not only docking, anchoring, but just general navigation through coastal areas. Hopefully some of these tips will keep you from running aground or having issues at docks that can be avoided if you understand tides and currents.
The best way to get a quick idea of the amount of current is to watch the water as it flows by buoys, docks, pilings, or any other fixed objects that are in the water. Grass will show the direction and general speed of the current too. The amount of change from high to low or vice versa will determine the amount of current due to tide. So knowing and understanding the effects of the tide will give you an idea of when and the extent of that current will be strong or weak. If the wind is with the current, blowing in the same direction, the seas tend to flatten out. But if the wind's blowing against the current, it can get choppy or even rough if the wind or current is strong. One of the best ways to obtain tide information is from a GPS navigator. Now, you might wonder, what in the world does a GPS have to do with the tide? But remember that the navigator knows the exact time and your exact position, the two key ingredients for determining the tide. Since a GPS receiver is a very good thing to have on a sailboat anyway, from a navigation standpoint, it's especially handy for obtaining tide information. Another useful feature is that you can enter any future date, time of day for any other position into the navigator and get a hold of the tide tables for that time and that location. Another convenient way of obtaining the tide for any location is via the World Wide Web. And last but certainly not least, there are the tide tables. Never forget, those electronics can fail to operate.
Piloting, in simplified terms, is the art of navigating in coastal waters and includes the use of paper charts, electronics, your compass, and generally knowing where you are at every point during the sail. What we're going to do in this particular segment is give you some tips relative to piloting and using those tools in a most effective way.
There are times when you might not have a fixed object in sight to take a bearing from. If you know any two of the three elements of speed, distance, and time, you can determine the other. If you know your position at any point in time, you can determine your position at a later time by simply knowing the speed that you've been traveling and the time that you've been traveling. The speed multiplied by the time equals the distance you've traveled. If you know the direction or compass heading that you've been using, you can draw a line on the chart from the previously known position at that compass bearing and extend it the distance you've traveled, and that's your approximate position on the chart. When you're in unfamiliar waters, it's often a good idea to verify your position, even though you have a GPS that shows your position. You do this by taking a bearing on at least two objects that are at roughly right angles to each other. 3 objects are better. The closer the objects are to you, the better as well. Draw a line on the chart at that bearing from the objects. Where the line crosses is, of course, your position. You can check the fix by checking the actual water depth against the depth shown on the chart. Our tip on using the chart is actually several tips. First of all, always have one with you, even though you have electronics on board. Make certain it's the correct chart for the area you're cruising. Look at the printing date. Make sure it's current. Next, fold the chart to show you just the area you're using and the compass rose and legend. This makes it easier to use. Always place it in an area or secure it where it can't be blown away. Remember that the depths shown on the chart are usually the average mean low water level, or level at low tide. Anything that's attracted to a magnet, such as metal flashlights, knives, tools, or other metal objects, can affect the compass. Keep the area near the compass clear of such objects. When you lay something down near the compass, it's usually a very handy place to put things. Make certain it doesn't affect the operation of the compass. You'd feel pretty stupid sailing trying to sail to a destination only to discover the compass had been guiding you the wrong way.
Safe anchoring is an art in itself. There are really 4 key issues that you want to consider whenever making a decision to anchor at a particular location. Number 1, you want to be sure that you have an appropriate bottom, one that your anchor will hold on. 2, you need to have sufficient depth, not too deep and not too shallow. 3, you want the appropriate swing room. And what I mean by that is that when you anchor up and the wind shifts and your boat shifts with that, you don't bang into a shoreline or another sailboat in the area. And lastly, but most importantly, you want to be sure that that anchorage is in a lee shore in a protected area. What we're going to do is to discuss some additional tips regarding anchoring in this segment.
Yes, first and foremost, you should always anchor in an area where it's safe to do so. Charts have designated areas for anchoring, and if you're anchoring overnight where risk of collision is always higher, it's always best if you anchor in a designated area. Never anchor in a traffic area such as an intercoastal waterway or channel leading into a harbor or marina facility. Given a choice, always anchor in the lee of the wind or the upwind side of the water. If you anchor on the windward shore and the anchor breaks loose, you'll be headed into the bank pretty quick. We have several tips for securing the anchor. First, check the current, and if it's strong, select another location. Make certain that you consider the tide. If it's high or low, there won't be much current, but going out or coming in there may well be. Avoid anchoring in a rocky area. Anchors just don't hold well on a rock bottom. Check the charts. Determine the depth from the chart or with a depth finder or sonar, and allow 3 to 7 times the depth for the amount of line or rode that you'll let out. Less in calm water and more in windy conditions. Make certain the anchor line is attached to the boat before dropping it. Don't rely on holding it or tying it off after you've dropped it. Drop it when the boat begins to move backwards. Steering a straight course usually isn't much of a problem as long as you can see your destination. In wind and current, if you can't see your destination, your boat may be headed in a direction that is quite different than you think. In other words, your boat's course over ground is different than your compass heading. The easiest way to correct for this is to use a GPS navigator or chart plotter that shows your actual heading versus your course over ground. If not, you need to compensate for the wind and current by estimating the amount that you're headed off course and compensate for that. Electronic chart plotters that use GPS for positioning information, especially those with WAAS, can provide very valuable information for sailors, even in really narrow channels. They show your vessel's position in relationship to everything around you, where you've been and where you want to go. Although they should never replace paper charts, they do provide convenient, reliable information, and many of them are easy to use even for those of you who aren't too keen on electronics. There are many different ways to avoid shallow water, such as studying the charts, using your depth finder, watching the water for shallow areas, and so forth. The problem is with most of them that you often discover the shallow water when it's too late to do anything about it. A forward-scanning sonar will help solve that problem for you. The skipper of a sailing vessel should know the proper way and the appropriate times that they should place a distress call, but often even the experienced ones don't. They just assume that they do. Mayday calls should only be placed when there is a life-threatening emergency. First of all, the channel you should use to contact the Coast Guard is channel 16. Repeat the call Mayday 3 times and give the name of your boat and call sign if you have one 3 times. Give your latitude and longitude if you know it, or the distance and bearing from any known position, such as 1 mile from buoy such and such. Describe the problem you're having, and provide a description of your boat. Tell them how many people are on board, and finally, repeat the name of your boat and call sign.
Maintaining a safe vessel has got to be one of the key concerns of today's mariners. What we have here is an offshore first aid kit. It's rather large, as you can see, but first aid kits should, for the most part, be sized based on the cruising area and where you plan to be sailing. If you're a day sailor, a smaller first aid kit may be very appropriate. If you're going to be sailing offshore and self-sufficient, then a kit of this size with a good deal more gear might be suitable for your needs. We're going to give you some additional tips on safety in this segment.
Avoid being in an area of pulleys that are under a heavy load. If they fail, the block could hit you. You can get hurt really bad if you're in the path of the jib while tacking, or if you're in the area or plane that the boom swings across. The bow or stern of the boat is more dangerous than the center because the motion is greater at either end of the boat. The number one problem with life jackets is that they're not used when they should be. They're totally worthless when they're not readily available or if they're not being worn. Make certain everyone knows where the life jackets are stored prior to leaving the dock. Also, make certain that anyone who can't swim or anyone that's underage is wearing one. Periodically check your lifelines for any wear, abrasion, or rust. If there's any doubt, replace them. Trusting them can be a really risky proposition. Always try to use a fixed object that is inside of the rail for support. You don't have to tell anyone. They need to stay on board the boat to be safe. But there are certain things someone may need to know to help avoid falling overboard. One important thing is to make certain everyone knows that they should never hold on to the running rigging. If the water's rough, don't try to stand. Crawl or slide around on your bottom. If it's that rough, make certain you're wearing a safety harness. Avoid the slick areas of the boat, plastic covers, polished wood, etc. And remember, the cockpit is always the safest place on board.
As we hoist our sails, we're going to keep 2 basic principles in mind. First of all, you want to be certain that your halyards are cleared and that they run smoothly through the sheaves at the top of the mast. And secondly, we want to take our vessel and point it into the wind so we minimize pressure on the sails as we raise them. We're going to show you how to raise a head sail and then also a mainsail in this particular segment. And keep in mind when you're getting your head sail ready is to take a good hard look at your jib halyard and make sure that it's not fouled prior to attaching it to the head of your jib sheet or your jib. There we go. It's already hanked up, and the only thing remaining to do now is to lead the two jib sheets back to their appropriate location in the cockpit and around the winches. Angie, do you mind taking this one right here and untying it for me?
Okay.
There you go.
Is there a certain way you tie them like this?
There are a couple of different ways to what they call hank up a line, and it seems like every sailor has his own favorite method. As long as it's put up in some kind of organized fashion that's fairly easy to untie, seems to be satisfactory.
Okay, now where you want me to go with this one?
Okay, if you want to follow me, what we're going to do is we can leave that right there, and I'll put that down the hatch in a moment. These are the jib sheets, and we're going to lead them along the outside of the boat back to those winches. So stay right there and just watch where I go first. I go on the outside of these shrouds, see that? And then I'm headed back to what we call a fair lead. It's this little block right here on the side of the boat. See yours? And you simply lead the line underneath this particular block and then come straight back to another fair lead, this one right here, which again allows you to change the direction of the line and around the drum. Now you come down this side and I'll help you with that. That's good. Remember the old adage, Andy, one hand for the sailor, one hand for the boat. Just take your time. Yeah, and that sheet will come around the outside of this lifeline, through the bottom of the block. Great. If you want to pass it to me,
Do I leave it on this side of that?
just like you have it, is perfect. I'll lead it back here to this other fair lead and take it around the winch. And before I leave it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a stopper knot in this particular line. And what that's going to do, Angie, is that if we take this line off this winch, it's not going to go back into the water because this knot will stop it right there. See? Hence they call it a stopper knot. And I'll go ahead and I'll affix one on the other side. Yeah, it's a cover. That white, yeah, that hood. If you grab it in the front, it lifts up and it's a hatch in here. Just lift it up enough to throw that down below. No, ma'am. Nope. We're just going to stow it right down there. Just toss it wherever she may land. Excellent. Good. Okay, now the next thing that we need to do is to remove the cover for the mainsail. We try to keep these covers on there because sunlight is one of the great destroyers of sail material. And the way we do this is we're going to untie it here at the back. We just use a simple half hitch back here to undo this line. And then we're going to go right down the bottom of the sail and just open these little clasps. I'll let you continue right on down, and then I'll go forward to the mast and start undoing it at the top. All right.
And do these here at the bottom?
Exactly. Looking great. All right, and then we just roll it on off, and we just roll that up in a loose ball and stow that anywhere below on one of the salons. On one of the salons or couches down there,
Okay.
wherever it lands. Super good. Okay. Now at this point, Angie, the only two remaining things we have to do are to make sure that the engine runs, and then we can start removing dock lines. So why don't we go ahead and start up the outboard. There we go. First of all, I'm going to take off a bow line and a spring line. And what we're going to do is we're going to leave these lines right here at the dock in a fashion that's going to allow us to pick them up easily and quickly when we come back in. I'm going to lie that right down here along the side of the dock. There we go. Got it? Great. And this one we'll leave right here so it's readily available when we return.
There's a little breeze going.
Yeah, it'll actually be quite nice out there. It's just very calm right here in the marina.
In most cases, especially on mid-sized and large sailboats, the sail's already folded and in place on the boom. Most have covers that you'll need to remove, but that's about all that's necessary prior to hoisting it. On smaller sailboats, it may be necessary to prepare the sails. The tip is to check everything out. For one thing, always make sure the halyard is securely attached. Make certain the bowline is secure and that the control lines are properly rigged and have the necessary slack in them. Be certain to look over everything well.
Are you right-handed or left-handed?
Right.
Okay. Why don't you sit where I am?
Okay.
All right. Now this tiller is actually your steering rudder. And if you turn it this way, the boat's going to go that way. If you turn it that way, the boat's going to go this way. And some people doing it for the first time feel like it's almost opposite from what it should be.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but go ahead and take your hand on it and just, we want to head kind of straight out this way. And if you want to get away from the marina, kind of point toward it and the boat will fall off. See that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Now you're going to be the helmsman when we get ready to raise the sails. That means you're going to be steering the boat.
Okay.
All right? And what we're going to want to do is when we get out here far enough from the marina, we're going to turn the boat into the wind and you're going to keep heading it into the wind until we get the sails up.
Okay.
All right? So the first thing we have to figure out is where is the wind coming from? And right now it doesn't feel like there's hardly any wind at all, but our little arrow's pointing behind us and that's what we're getting. We're getting some wind from behind us. Let's head up this way a little bit.
Okay.
Good, you get a quick feel for that.
Yeah.
That's no big deal, is it?
Yeah.
Get a little breeze out here, it'll cool off a little bit, be nice.
Yeah,
See those two cranes over there? Are they hard to see? Let's try and aim for that, okay? See if you can hold the course straight for those rascals.
okay.
And when I have the sail up and I say fall off, I want you to turn the boat back in this direction again.
Okay.
Make sense? Okay? Head up means head up to the wind, fall off means kind of turn away from the wind, okay? So I'm going to take these bungees off now. All right, I'm just going to check the halyard here to make sure that it's free and it looks good. All right, now at this point I'm going to go back to the winch and raise the main. Okay, we have something binding. Let's go forward and find out what that is.
The mainsail is usually the first one to go up. Pulling on the halyard at the mast is the easiest way to hoist the mainsail, even when you're using a winch. You want to make certain that the main sheet has slack, or otherwise the sail will fill up prior to reaching the top. This would, of course, make it a lot more difficult to hoist the sail. Someone located at the mast should watch the luff tape where it feeds into the mast to make certain it doesn't get stuck. If it does, the person using the winch should back off and allow the other crew member to get it free and properly refed.
That's good, Angie. Just hold that direction right there until we get the sail up nice and tight. There, I believe that's going to do. And then we'll be ready to raise the head sail.
Allow the sail to luff freely so that it doesn't fill when doing so.
All right, Angie, if you'd hold that course right toward that water tower. Do you see it over there? And we are underway. Now you stay right there, and I'm going to slow this motor down and then shut it off. We'll let that run for just a second at idle speed to cool off. Huh?
I'm still turning it, right?
No, you're doing fine.
Halyards are usually cleated off or secured by a mechanical device called a rope clutch or jammer. Always be careful when you open a jammer with the rope under tension. If the rope is under a heavy load, use a winch behind the jammer to add tension to the rope to prevent it from shooting out fast and burning your hands.
Give a mariner a quality set of binoculars, paper charts, and a compass, and that individual should be able to sail most anywhere in the world with a high degree of reliability. Fortunately, today we have some additional excellent navigational aids that simplify the process even more. What we're going to show you today are some of those particular devices and how to effectively operate them and get good information from them.
When you're meeting other sailboats, remember, a boat on a port tack must give way to one on a starboard tack. When both boats are on the same tack, the boat to windward has to give way to the leeward boat. Any boat on a port tack must be kept clear if its skipper is in doubt about the tack of another boat to windward. The only time power boats have to give way to sailboats is under the following three conditions. If a motorboat is being overtaken by a sailboat, the motorboat must give way. If the motorboat is operating in a narrow channel and can't maneuver easily, or if it's too large to avoid a sailboat, then the motorboat has to give way to the sailboat. If there's ever any doubt about who has the right-of-way, or if it appears that an incoming boat doesn't know the right-of-way, then yield by all means. Remember that if you have a motor on your sailboat and you're under power, then you're technically a motorboat. When a crew member goes overboard, throw them a life jacket or ring to help them float and to help you see them as soon as it is possible. Sail to the leeward side of the person by either jibbing or coming about and luffing up alongside them. In low visibility conditions such as nighttime, be extremely careful not to hit them with the boat trying to rescue them.
Aids to navigation are the highway signs, the road signs for mariners and sailors. What we're going to do in this particular segment is identify some of these different, more common navigation aids and what they mean to you as you cruise through coastal waters.
Buoys and day markers are the traffic signs on the water. They show you the way, warn you of danger, and can assist you in determining your position. The color of the buoy is the most important thing, red right returning. For those who can't determine color or when and where low visibility conditions exist, the shape is the important thing, either a green can or a red none. Buoys and day markers are either lighted or unlighted. Don't learn this the hard way by running into an unlighted one during nighttime or low visibility conditions. Navigation lights let everyone else know you exist and the direction you're headed. Most of you have them on your boat as required by the Coast Guard, but many times they just don't work. Check your navigation lights frequently. You're not safe in low visibility conditions or at nighttime without them. Approach the dock at a slow speed. While this may seem quite obvious and pretty basic, Too great a speed is most often the reason for a missed approach, or even worse, a mishap. How slow? Well, try using 1/2 the speed you think is appropriate. The more time you have to prepare for the approach and to make corrections during the approach, the easier it is to make certain everything goes smoothly. Do not rely on stopping the boat by putting the engine in reverse. Consider the tides. You don't want to leave it hanging on the pilings or dock. Make sure you have enough slack in the dock lines to accommodate a drop or a rise in the tide.
There are key components on every sailboat that require routine maintenance. What we're going to do in this segment is highlight some of those components and show you the effective and safe way to maintain these so that your trips are pleasurable and enjoyable.
When you're washing down your boat, especially if you've used it in salt water, always pay special attention to the running rigging or all the control lines and gear. It gets the most use of anything on your boat. Check the ends of all the lines, and if you have any that have started to fray, repair them. Flush the lines with fresh water, dry, coil, and store them. Rinse all the blocks with fresh water and lubricate any that the manufacturer recommends lubricating. Clean the winches, making sure that they're free of salt. Lubricate them as well if recommended by the manufacturer. A sail changes when the fabric has been overloaded or stretched. The leech may flutter excessively, the sail might wrinkle. Battens may not fit properly and the foot or luff can become too long. The changes may take away from the power and lift of the sail. Store them dry and out of the sun. You should always be aware of just how good your sails are holding up. Just because you're a sailor and dislike engines doesn't mean you can get by abusing one. The more you put off doing necessary maintenance, the more costly it's going to be. The key to engine maintenance is performing it before it becomes too late. The battery is the #1 concern. Next is probably the fuel filter. Make sure you change all filters and change the oil as often as recommended by the maker of the engine. You can store your boat in the water or out of the water inside a building or outside of a building. Each scenario brings on some different problems. Our tip is simple. Storing a boat can cause some maintenance problems to accelerate more so than just using the boat. Just because you have your boat stored and aren't using it doesn't mean many things that require attention can go ignored.